Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this, one of the last two parallel sessions. My name is Giles Merritt from Friends of Europe, and I shall be co-chairing this discussion with André Loesekrug-Pietri. Have I got that?
Perfectly right.
Perfectly right. And André is he's basically are you a venture capitalist? You're an investor based in Beijing these days. So you have a very wide view of these things. And we've also got Ambroise Fayolle sitting on my right from the European Investment Bank, and Jan Miske on my far left from the McKinsey Global Institute. Just a couple of words before handing on to André. What sort of infrastructure are we going to talk about? And indeed, are we only going to talk about infrastructure? Because the temptation is to talk about the Juncker Plan. And I personally welcome the Juncker Plan because it got a new commission off to a good start with a concrete project. But I wonder if it doesn't actually have some fundamental disadvantages, some flaws. I also wonder if this afternoon we shouldn't be talking about other things like other forms of infrastructure, especially energy, and the sort of infrastructure, if we really are going to look at green growth, and I'm never quite sure what we're talking about green growth, whether that doesn't require infrastructure on its own. I'm not going to go into the Juncker Plan. I'd look forward to listening to Ambroise, because the EIB is, after all, at the moment, the principal source of cash for the Juncker Plan. What I would like to add is a question mark. We've been talking a lot during the course of the day about the refugee crisis. And it does strike me that what we really do lack at the moment is the sort of infrastructure for integrating what is probably just the first wave of non-European migrants who we, in my opinion, badly need to swell the European workforce. But what sort of infrastructure should we be creating in terms of schools and housing for these people? And wouldn't that show quicker results than maybe more high-speed trains, more bridges? André.
Thank you, Giles, and good afternoon, everybody. So very happy to have Giles as co-chair and moderator, and these two excellent panelists, and also we try to do it as interactive as possible. So, I mean, the 3-4 points I would like our panelists to react on is we talk about infrastructure, we talk about new plans, but coming from the private sector, I also know that in our industry we talk about dry powder. And just to give you some numbers, just in private equity, investment in non-listed companies, there's $1.4 trillion at this very moment ready to be deployed, and 140 billion just in Europe. So there is a lot of money. So the second question based on that is, what kind of projects will either the Juncker Plan or the EIB finance? Are these projects which are either not commercial or projects which would have difficulties to find financing with these traditional investors? Which leads to the third maybe point, and maybe Jan can also build on that, is what are the priorities? What is basically the USP? We heard a lot about in the previous panel, for those who were in the digital panel, was what is Europe's differentiation? Will we try with this leverage to differentiate ourselves? You talked about energy, Giles. That might be one of the points. And fourth, trying to extend that beyond our borders. How do we try to have these 21 billion turning into 315. Ambroise, you still need to explain how that works, maybe for me. How that can be a leverage effect, not just on confidence, but also bringing more money. We know the Chinese have built up this Asian Infrastructure Bank. Can we maybe benefit from this money and leverage on our own plans? I mean, how do we extend our own projects into and tapping into the global resources to our benefit? So maybe we start with Ambroise.
Absolutely, Ambroise.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. Let me say a few words about, in answer to, and I don't want to be too long. My first remark will be on the origin of the Juncker Plan. Basically, it's true that everybody says there is plenty of liquidity. The problem is what we also see in Europe is that the level of investment compared with the level of investment before the crisis, so in 2008, is 15% below. And this is not what we see in other regions in the world, which are our competitors. So that's why there has been this plan, including on one aspect that is important, which is we may be not lacking money, we are lacking willingness to take risks. Thereby, the idea that there will be a guarantee provided by the European Union, basically mostly from the European budget and partly from the own funds of capital of the EIB, to increase the degree of risks on projects that are EIB projects. EIB projects are not projects that we do ourselves only. We never take more than 50% of a project. So the reason is that one. How are we going to go from 21 billion of guarantees to 315 billion of project is actually we are not concerned about that. The fact that we are using our own balance sheet to make our projects, and we are associating other investors to create total investment that will be basically 15 times the amount of the guarantee that is provided. And if you want an example, in 2012 there was a capital increase of the EIB that was 10 billion euros, and that allowed an additional 180 billion euro of investment. So this kind of 15 around leverage is something that we know quite well. The Juncker Plan is in place, FC is in place, which is, frankly speaking, quite a remarkable achievement. I say that I've joined the institution in March, so I'm not taking any privilege for that. But the work of the European Parliament, of the European Commission, and of the EIB has been extremely quick for an initiative that has been basically presented at the end of last year. And we have already started to pre-finance a number of projects that show what we can do with this kind of initiative, which are basically projects that have a degree of risk that is higher than what we usually do on average, or risks that we would not have taken before without the guarantee, because of our risk model that includes the need to keep an excellent rating because we borrow to lend. So for just to give you examples, and then I'll come back if you wish on what we are going to do more. We are going to do more equity and equity type, because this is something that is missing. And we have already started to take shares in funds or funds of funds, etc. We are not doing, at least not now, direct equity. We are going to do smaller projects, especially in renewable energy, because this is also something that is going to help boost investment in Europe and at the same time reach the targets in energy. We are going to do, and we have already started, capital relief. So just to give you an example, there was a project that was approved at the end of the semester by our board. This is a project by Saar LB, one of the Landesbank in Germany. And what we are going to do is to provide a guarantee. They have a number of projects in renewable energy, but they are now blocked by the capital level that is needed to increase the amount of these projects. So what we are going to do, because we cannot buy existing projects, is that we provide a guarantee, and at the time they develop new projects, we will basically take part of the existing portfolio of renewable energy projects from this bank. So this kind of capital relief is something very new for us, but that's going to be probably very promising in terms of develop new ideas. And finally, and this is as important as difficult, we want absolutely to deal with market gaps in Europe. There are market gaps. They have to be identified precisely. They depend very much country by country. But this is something that we work on. Just to give you an example that was approved in the spring, again under the FC, so under the Juncker Plan. We have in France a situation where part of the energy efficiency objectives to be met, they need retrofitting from a number of private homes. And this is a market that is very difficult because the banks don't go there. These are very small loans, difficult to assess, long term. They don't believe in this market, to make it simple. What we do is we are doing to boost the start of this market by lending to the institutions regionally that are going to assess the situation and make the loans to private entities. We hope that is going to work. It's risky. This is why actually the Juncker Plan is about. And we think that that's going to help basically boost investment in Europe. Are we solving everything with that? No. There is also in the investment plan for Europe an important component, which is the need to improve the investment climate, and the European Commission works hard on this part of the plan. There is also links clearly between what we do on one side on the investment plan for Europe and the development of the capital market union, because there are links between investment and financing of investment.
Thanks very much for that, Ambroise, and we can come back to some of the details. We've got lashings of time. Let's turn to Jan Mischke from McKinsey Global Institute. Jan, you've done a lot of work on looking at some of the infrastructure needs around the world, and the figures you've come up dwarf the Juncker Plan. So my first question to you is, in your opinion, is the Juncker Plan capable of kick-starting sluggish growth in Europe?
Yeah, so I would think the Juncker Plan is a very good idea, given the various constraints also of political nature in Europe, and it should continue with full force, and it can certainly make some of a difference. But I would like to give a somewhat broader picture to also show what other options we need to take, because it will not be enough in and by itself, for sure. So in terms of the numbers you also referred to, Europe has been spending about 2.6% of GDP on infrastructure when you look at transport, electricity and power, telecoms and digital and water infrastructure. In our estimate, in order to support the kind of growth that European citizens in our survey voice that they aspire to, we would need to spend 0.9% of GDP more. That's a shortfall of 140 billion euros per year, just on those types of infrastructure, fixing those potholes, going to renewable energy, or just securing the energy supply in those countries which depend on unreliable partners. That number actually goes to somewhere between 300 and 500 billion euro per year if you have a much broader scope, including affordable housing, including investments in research and development and education, and that is even before integrating a million additional migrants per year. This kind of gap is not uncommon. You see it in pretty much any G20 economy except Japan and China. And there's a very commonly accepted narrative. As an infrastructure gap, public finance is tight, so we need more private investment and private finance. And then very good and helpful and ideas come out of that, like the Juncker Plan, and those should continue. But as compelling as that narrative is, it is actually also incomplete at best. First, public finance is not tight. Interest rates have never been lower in history. There is no financing constraint for governments. Yet despite that, public net investment in Europe has collapsed from 0.6 to 0.2% of GDP since the crisis. And it has collapsed because of fiscal rules that do not distinguish. I won't argue against the fiscal rules, by the way. I think we need them for political economy terms, but that's a different story. But they don't distinguish between profligate consumption and productive investment. And there might be better ways. And a very simple one, if a government needs to invest $1 billion to build a bridge, that billion goes straight to the deficit. So it doesn't happen. Why are the accounting principles this way while every corporation, when it builds machinery or a plant for $1 billion, activates that on a balance sheet, depreciates it over the 25-year lifetime? When is the time when we finally reconsider public accounting systems, or at least interpret the rules of the Juncker Plan, of the fiscal compact, and the various rules that we have set ourselves to differentiate the types of spending? There's also ample opportunity to increase revenues for public coffers from infrastructure. It's not only a cost item. If you expand a city, you redevelop neighborhoods, you put in the urban infrastructure, there's a massive uplift in property and land values associated with that. Cities in Spain, for instance, reap most of that profit and put it back into actually funding that infrastructure. 27 other countries in Europe don't do that at scale. Why not? Why does that profit go as a windfall to private landowners who haven't done the redevelopment? And then thirdly, where's the efficiency and productivity story in that matter? In our estimate, there could be savings of about 40% on that total infrastructure cost just by applying globally leading practice. And in many cases, that actually means European practice. Some European countries have figured out bits and pieces along selecting projects, delivering them, and managing existing infrastructure as it's more smartly. Just think of the UK's investment into infrastructure planning and cost reviews and reference class forecasting, or the Swedish Transport Agency, which is deploying lean principles into some of its infrastructure construction, global sourcing, design to value principles during the delivery, or the way that Finland invests into smart traffic flow management to lower the burden on its road infrastructure. So huge savings are possible before even going to expand into the infrastructure needs.
Thank you. May I build on it? Because when I listened to both of you, and I heard the comment of the Vice President this morning saying, we're launching this plan and now we're waiting for projects. And then you were speaking about the fact that there might be a need of using the best examples in some countries and to scale it up at the European level. So how much, maybe a question to Ambroise, but also for you, Jens, how much is there a vision behind that? How much do you want to be prescriptive in the projects that you're going to finance? Or are you just waiting? Because the big risk, and again, I'm playing the devil's advocate in order to get also the discussion going, there is a little bit the rumor, especially among the private sector, and it's not but I hear a lot, it's all the white elephants who are going to be pushed to the Juncker Plan and which cannot be financed elsewhere. How much, Ambroise, is there a vision behind these are the areas we want to address? And when there is a good example like the Spanish one, I'm just picking out, we want to scale it and help really roll it out.
Okay, there is part of your question whose answer is more easy than the other part. To me, the easy part is, are we going to finance white elephants? Because the the way the initiative has been structured is exactly done to avoid this risk, with the decision to be taken to give or not to give the guarantee from the European budget taken by a committee of experts, not by politicians. And for the rest, these are EIB projects. So unless you consider that basically EIB projects are financing white elephants in Europe, there is, to me, no big risk that we are going to finance things that have basically not a strong interest for the European and for boosting growth and employment, which at the end of the day is our key aim. The more tricky part is how we're going to decide the kind of objectives. And when you look at the regulation, the objectives are quite diverse. That's true, but that's also normal. I mean, there are needs for investment in many dimensions. But at the same time, the process is demand-driven. So, and we are dealing with promoters that have to bring projects to us. So we are not going to, this is not the Ghost Plan. So we need to work with projects that are brought to us. I think probably the good aspect of that, and that is allowed by an institution that is quite centralized in terms of its staffing, is that on many, I hope, projects, and that's what we're already trying, what we are already seeing. We will learn from projects that work, innovative projects that work in 1 or 2 countries, to try to see how we can expand in other countries if there is an interest, and if it meets the needs of that given country. So what we hope is that we will be able to indeed deal with market gaps in various countries. This is not going to be one size fits all. That's not going to be white elephants, and that's not going to be easy.
Could I just jump in with a question before opening it up? When the Juncker Plan was unveiled, 1 or 2 people made reference to the New Deal in America in the 1930s. Do you think the Juncker Plan is too limited? That the New Deal, of course, was much wider and was actually much cheaper than the infrastructure plan in Europe. It encompassed a reorganization, creation of new agencies, and so on. But my question to you is this: you're at the coal face of the Juncker Plan at the moment. You can see its limitations. Should we be thinking bigger?
Personally, I think we should start getting implementing the Juncker Plan as is. I mean, let's not dream about what could have been done or in an ideal world. We know that the figures that are on the table are the figures that are possible within the current EU budget and the possibilities from EIB to contribute to that. 315 billion euros is not ridiculous at all, especially if it finances projects that are of added value in Europe. So I would say we will see if it's not enough or if it has been poorly calibrated. To me, the most urgent thing is that we start the process now and we implement that the best we can.
And then we'll throw it over.
So, I would certainly agree. Let's start with the Juncker Plan as it is and turn it into a blasting success. And in parallel, change a little bit of the fine print of public accounting and unleash another 300 billion per year in public investment.
Thank you. There is a small question of how soon the Juncker Plan will produce results. Because if you want political support for something, you've got to point to results. How soon?
How soon? Sorry.
How soon will we see results?
Okay, we have actually started to pre-finance projects that we think will get the support from the budget of the EU guarantee, even if the EU guarantee, even if the whole governance system is not in place. So since the spring, what we do is every month we present to our board projects that we think will be eventually supported by the EU guarantee under the Juncker Plan. But as long as the governance structure is not fully in place, we take that on our own balance sheet. So that's why and the projects that I have mentioned earlier, these are projects that are in this category. So we have already started, and internally we are preparing ourselves to do something which is indeed a big change for the institution, which is to move from big projects, small risk, to smaller projects, bigger risks. And just to give you an idea, we have already today, we do around 70 to 80 billion euros loans per year. Out of the 70 billion loans, we do around 4 to 5 billion euros of risky loans. We are going to move that, thanks to the guarantee, to 20 billion per year. That's a big change, and that's what why we are hopeful that this can make a change in the investment environment in Europe.
Thank you very much, Ambroise. I'm going to throw it open to the floor, but I have to tell you, I'm looking forward to hearing when, will it be next year, the year after, people are going to start being hired, when the bulldozers are going to start rolling. Who would like to come in? Yes, please. And over there. Yep.
Hi, my name is Ed Glucksman. I work for Wardell Armstrong, an environmental consultancy based in the UK. My question is, could you talk a bit about low carbon infrastructure and how important that's going to be going forward within the grand scheme of things that you mentioned?
Sure, happy to. So, well, I hope it's going to be very important. It depends very strongly on the kind of regulations and agreements reached also on global carbon abatement. I hope there will be ambitious targets that also have then severe ramification on European infrastructure investment. But in terms of then also moving towards a lower carbon environment and our broader energy infrastructure, the key priority for Europe should be energy efficiency. That might sound surprising given that we have countries like Denmark who are known as kind of one of the globally leading economies and so on. But if you look at energy intensity across European countries by sector, transport, household, industry, business and so on, in each of those sectors, there's a 6 to 8-fold difference in energy efficiency between EU member countries. 6 to 8-fold within Europe. That is unbelievable. There's so huge opportunity to save on energy, in addition to moving to a lower carbon energy, that I would start there. And that would also solve many of the supply and price challenges.
Okay, former European Commissioner Joachim Almunia, and after that we go to Philippe Maystadt, the former boss of the EIB.
Yes, thank you, Merritt. Well, a naive question coming from an old commissioner. I can believe, being generous, that there is not a lack of projects, that projects are there. I heard some doubts in some quarters, but let's imagine that there are projects to be funded if there are resources available. I know that the biggest strategic initiatives, the energy union, the digital single market, infrastructure projects and all this, will require in the next years in Europe huge amounts of money to be invested. Much bigger than the possibilities of the Juncker Plan, that I welcome, of course. I'm very happy to listen to Ambroise saying that things are going on, and perfect. But there are limits, 350 billions in several years. But on the other hand, from the macroeconomic point of view, we have an excess of savings in Europe. In particular in the euro area, Germany 8 points of GDP, roughly speaking. So in the whole euro area, 3 points of GDP every year. Not for the whole 5 years period of the Juncker Plan, but every year. Can we use it in a more efficient way? And if yes, what is the instrument to be used to a more efficient allocation, not only energy efficiency, I fully agree, more efficient allocation of the resources that can be available? It's a problem of the financial system that we have. It's a problem that can be solved with the Capital Markets Union strategy. What are the reasons why, having a lot of needs of investment here, from many points of view, we are not able to use the savings we have?
Give it a first go. I was at a G20 high-level roundtable on infrastructure and investment recently, and it was stunning to hear pension funds and bank executives argue about how they outcompete each other on financing infrastructure by like 3 basis points in order to make some business. So the savings glut is very real. The shortage of projects is very real, and I'm yet to get really good examples of projects that are commercially viable and wouldn't find funding. I think the interesting bit in Europe and the opportunity is to actually get going with those projects that are not commercially viable. There's lots of them, fixing all those potholes on streets, building those new train connections, building the electricity interconnectors between countries where they currently don't exist. Many of those projects will need real public funding that you can structure in all kinds of off-balance sheet special purpose vehicles, or just allow the public hand to borrow against them and get on with it. Once we get going on that front, we get the market going again, and we will also have many more commercially viable projects, because the now analysis, corporate investment always follows the recovery. It never leads. So we can do all kinds of things with financial markets. We need the recovery first.
Can I just add one word to Joachim's excellent question? I think there is, I mean, if the answer were easy, we would have done that already. I think there are 2 things that we could try to develop, and that's what we are trying to do. The first one is put more emphasis on cross-border initiatives. And for example, there is a subsidiary of EIB which is dealing especially with SMEs. And as you may know, venture capital today in Europe is very much national. There has been, through the Juncker Plan initiative, the creation of a platform where basically promoters from, or funds from Germany could allocate more directly to venture capital in Italy, for example. These kind of things. That could help bridge the gap to a small extent. But still, this is something that could show also that this can work. Now, that being said, it's true that what we often hear is that there are problems that are related to regulation, for example, for these kind of investors. And actually, what we also would like to see is more, for example, those investors, look at insurance companies in Europe. Often they say, we would like to invest in infrastructure projects, but this is very costly in terms of capital requirements. Even if this is not necessarily consistent with the real risk level that is taken through infrastructure projects. What the European Commission has put in its action plan on the Capital Market Union is to work on this, because this is linked to Solvency II. And also to try to work on the way to pool projects, of infrastructure projects, and securitize them. That's something that we could also participate to. And this would then allow those insurance companies which have not, there are not only the alliances. Allianz can do its own assessment of infrastructure projects. Most insurance companies in Europe cannot. So they could then do, through the securitization, contribute to the development of infrastructure projects in ways that they cannot do today because the capital requirements are probably too high and because they don't have the infrastructure that would allow them to invest in these projects.
Maybe one point I'm going to add on that. There's two things we sometimes forget. It's a bit of black and white between what is commercial and not commercial. And we forget the concept of cost curve. They're just simply projects which, if they are only in Spain, I take your example again, are not profitable, but if they're scaled. And one very perfect example is this whole electric vehicle topic that has been going on and on and on. And maybe it's actually not public hand which will solve the problem. It's the Volkswagen case, which might actually be the tipping point. And I think it's a bit of shame, because we all know today it's a how do you call that? Catch-22. I mean, do you start with the charging stations or do you start with the cars? So you need massive investments in order to have enough charging stations that then people think it's a smart way to do. And that's why I will allow myself to challenge a bit more, Ambroise, on this prescriptive, because I know, again, from a private fund perspective, I see less and less funds doing now everything. More and more funds, because of this liquidity glut, are trying to get specialized, because money is a commodity, but expertise to choose the right projects or the right strategies, that's where you need, and that's where maybe a bank which brings this guarantees to your ZALB, I think this is a great example, could actually be deployed. If I may challenge you a bit, I think maybe the Juncker Plan should have a little bit more the guts of saying these are the 3 or 4 big priorities, and we will finance that and call for projects. I think then they will maybe emerge. But
let's go to Philippe Maystadt, who after all has enormous experience of the European Investment Bank, and then perhaps come back to how we can actually improve on the Juncker Plan. Mr. Maystadt.
Thank you. On the European Investment Bank, I just say that I fully agree with Vice President Fayolle, especially about the role of EIB in the implementation of the Juncker Plan. You can see that EIB is ready to use new instruments like equity, like capital relief, and I think this is a good way to make progress. But I would like to come back to a remark of Mr. Mischk about a major weakness of the Stability and Growth Pact. You're quite right when you say that the pact makes practically no distinction between consumption, current expenditures, and investment. There is the so-called investment clause, which allows for a temporary deviation of the adjustment path, but this clause requires so many conditions that, in fact, there is very few projects which can benefit from this clause. So my proposal would be, because, this proposal, to make this distinction, which makes sense in economic terms, the proposal to make this distinction was put forward last time by Mario Monti when he was Prime Minister. He makes this proposal, but it was not followed by his colleagues because they could point to white elephants in some countries. I remember that another Prime Minister said that investment in Greece, especially in military equipment, were probably not the type of investment we should encourage. So there was this problem of definition. So my proposal would be that we could agree on a category of priority investments which could benefit of more flexibility under the Stability and Growth Pact, but these investments should meet 3 criteria. First one, a European common interest in the sense of the communication of the Commission of 2014. This means that it should contribute to one objective of the European Union, and it should have a transnational dimension. This would be a way to encourage cross-border projects. Second criteria, an economic rate of return, which should be sufficient. And there are a methodology developed by EIB to estimate this economic rate of return. And third criteria is sustainability. This project should use the best technologies to limit the use of natural resources and the emission of greenhouse gases. And an independent authority should check whether these criteria are met. I would suggest that, for example, it could be a European entity composed of the people which in each member state are in an independent way to check whether the Stability and Growth Pact is applied. It's a novelty, it's quite recent, but no, in each member state you have to designate an independent authority to check whether you apply correctly the Stability and Growth Pact. You could make a European entity to check whether the criteria are met, and then this investment could benefit from a distinction between current expenditure and investment.
Jan, and then we'll ask Ambroise.
So, thank you very much for that proposal. I can only wholeheartedly agree. And in fact, in many discussions, particularly in the more hawkish countries about the proposal, the immediate reaction was almost, yeah, but then you have the white elephants and all that profligate spending again and open the back door. But there's very simple solutions to that. And in corporations, those solutions are called auditors. They look at assets and then they are impaired if they don't have the value that is in the books. So you can use auditors, you can use those criteria, you could even use the EIB to make the economic returns case or confirm the economic returns case. Or you could even, to go back to the Juncker Plan, you could even use the 300 billion lending capacity on the Juncker Plan and just say, every project that gets lending via the Juncker Plan, even if that lending is directly to a government, is outside.
This would be a limited version of my proposal. What you just said about the link with the Juncker Plan.
Ambroise, do you agree with the boss you never had?
No, I have to extreme respect, of course, for President Maystadt. There is something that we never do. We never lend directly to governments. I mean, this is something that is not consistent with. And then this is a treaty that you have to change, probably more than just rules. I have, of course, sympathy for this idea, but frankly speaking, this is a debate that is not within EIB. This is a debate that should take place here and at the ministers' level of the ECOFIN, if any. There is one just point that I want to say on what Philippe Maystadt said, which is very important. We are of course financing only bankable projects. So and this is something that is really going through. I in my professional life I spend more time in Washington than in European institutions. I worked for the IMF for 10 years, for the World Bank for 6 years. The World Bank is a very different institution than the EIB. The World Bank is probably today, or EIB is today what the World Bank was probably 20 or 25 years ago. I mean by that, EIB is a bank of engineers. The World Bank has become a bank of economists, more financing big programs, support, etc. Which has, it's not a question of I mean, I'm not assessing, but just saying that at EIB, there is a key role for, and Philippe knows this department very well, basically engineers. So if they are not convinced that a project is a good one, with reasonable probability of a good rate of return, financing basically priorities of the European leaders, there is no way it's going to go through. So, and that's going to be the case also for investment under the FC.
Can I maybe just ask a question on, Ambroise, you mentioned that 50% maximum of projects are financed. Will it be also the rule under the Juncker Plan? And more generally, how do you plan to engage with all the other investors, these funds that Jan mentioned, these pension funds? Will you co-finance them? Will you lead the way? I mean, how do you expect practically to be a leverage effect?
It very much depends. The leverage effect actually is quite different if you have an equity investment and if you have a classic loan. What we consider is basically the leverage from an equity investment can easily be in the 15 to 20 range. What we are going to do is to rely on. We didn't want to create a special bank within the bank, with the sort of the old bank and the new bank. That would have been probably the best way to destroy the institution. So these are the same teams, and actually, even if we are going to quadruple the amount of risky loans we do thanks to the EU initiative, 20 billion is basically the minority of our business compared with the 50 billion additional we are going to do every year through the usual, if I may say so, loans that we do. So I think it's going to be very different. If you take infrastructure projects, often it implies public entities. It implies often we do our quite active in the PPP projects. If you go more in the equity and quasi-equity, then you have to deal indeed with funds. There are funds that we know quite well, and they come to us and make new proposals. There are also national promotional banks that are very active in bringing ideas, projects, etc. And part of the Juncker Plan is the creation of what we call an advisory hub that is going to help those entities, especially private entities, in countries, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where they probably have less, for example, national promotional banks than they have in Western Europe, to help them work on concrete projects that could be delivered through the investment plan of Europe. So this is moving. To answer your previous question, the new recruitments have already started. We have already hired around 100 more people for that. And we will continue at EIB. Yeah. Oh, that was not your question. Sorry. Okay.
It was for the projects and when the bulldozers were going to start moving some earth. John Richardson wants to come in, then we're going over there. And I also, before we finish, I want to remind everybody what the title of this session is: Defining Europe's Infrastructural Challenges. It is not, at least I hope it isn't, defining Europe's institutional limitations. John.
Nevertheless, Giles, I moved from the second to the first, if I may. We've been talking a fair bit here about major infrastructure projects, which are not seen as currently commercially viable, but where government investment might provide the wherewithal to launch them. Two such projects in the United Kingdom are the second high-speed rail line and several nuclear power stations for the future, both of these going in the direction of something like green infrastructure. My understanding is that agreement has been reached this week that the Chinese will invest in these. They will provide the investment funds and derive an income from it, thus allowing the United Kingdom to maintain budgetary discipline and get its projects financed. So the big objection to that, as I understand it, is this gives the Chinese the possibility of getting into the UK infrastructure, putting in a sort of software which would allow it to shut it all down in the event of conflict, etc. Now, I want to link this to the early days of the European Union, which started off with the European Coal and Steel Community, where quite rightly it was thought that merging, integrating the crucial sectors of Germany and France, the coal and steel industries, would be a means of preventing them ever going to armed conflict with each other again. I think something which many of us actually believe. Now, if you put those two things together, surely Chinese investment in European infrastructure gives China an even greater stake in the success of Europe. So I believe that is the correct argument to this. Why then should we not have a negotiation with the Chinese
to see whether they will invest in, and of course derive income from, a Europe-wide network of charging stations for the new electric cars, which we're going to have, and, for example, for LNG facilities in all European ports around our coast.
So I would personally actually agree with your view of more integration is better. I do ask myself the question that I think it was you mentioning that Europe is, and the Eurozone is generating a 3% of GDP annual savings surplus. Why do we need the Chinese? I don't understand it. Why do we need them? We have more than enough financing than we ever need in the next decades.
I don't know if you were there earlier on. I mean, I'm personally a little bit ashamed by what's going on right now in the UK. I have nothing to say to the UK. I'm not British, but I would concur with that. And really my question is, and here I'm not in the moderator role, but I'm more in the question role, is we all know that we have energy transition to come to you, the power part. We all know that companies like RWE or E.ON are zombies. They are disappearing. I mean, everybody on the stock market knows that. We have a very fast transition to not more energy, but better use of energy. So the old model of growing revenues is over. Companies like EDF or ENGIE have also facing huge. So, and former Commissioner Almunia is there, so he might also have a point on that. Is this investment plan that we have also not a way, and this is a bit top-down, a way to also create this critical mass? I mean, today between France and Germany, you are an equipment maker selling to EDF, you cannot scale because the policies are totally different in the UK and in Germany. And we heard earlier that scale is the name of the game. So how much is this investment plan, turning again to Ambroise, and maybe anybody has a point, how much is this investment plan? Very often investment plans are a way to trigger industrial transformation. In private equity, we call that buy and build. That means you buy several companies and you make a larger national champions. You may have heard that in China, they just merged the two taxi hailing apps in order to compete with Uber. They have merged the two equivalent of TripAdvisors to create a national champion. They have merged the two largest railroad companies to create a massive competitor to Siemens, ABB, and Alstom globally. But you need money to create these mergers. Mergers are not always good, but at least you create the critical mass. So, question maybe, is the plan or is the investment going into that direction also to create some kind of industrial policy, or is it completely outside? If somebody wants to react.
We'll throw that question up into the air and hope somebody comes back on it, but let's go. Yeah, it's on.
Céline Charvaya from Oxfam. So according to Sir Nicholas Stern, if we are to stay below 2 degrees, his estimate is that we need 90 trillion globally of investment in low carbon infrastructure over the next 15 years. And a good part of that infrastructure might not be commercially viable. So what would you need from COP21, which is happening in 5 weeks, from governments to be able to face this challenge? And what would you see Europe's role in those negotiations to make sure we're able to mobilize that sort of amazing order of magnitude?
Yeah, these overall investment numbers are always shocking, but in the end, over that period of time, it's something like 4% of GDP, so it's actually very viable. It's not kind of someone dreaming up a big number, it's doable. And what it requires, in my mind, is actually the type of carbon pricing, whichever form it takes, that turns these projects from not viable into viable. It's as simple as that. And then the money will flow. And we just look at it flowing. We don't even need to do anything more.
Any thoughts, Ambroise? Or perhaps I can offer the thought that I'm sure Lord Stern's figures, I'm sure they're right, But I do recall that the International Energy Agency reckons that over the next 20 years you need to spend 25 trillion just to keep the lights running. So it doesn't strike me as a particularly difficult target to reach. I wonder if I could at this point widen the discussion, maybe to talk about Juncker Plan Mark II. I'm well aware that rate of return is crucial to the way the Juncker Plan is working at the moment. But I'm also aware that we're looking at possibly 1 million new people in Europe by the end of this year. It's hard to know because the European Commission doesn't seem to have crunched any numbers, to my disappointment. But we're looking at a trend where non-Europeans by the million will be coming to our countries. So my question is this: what are we going to do in infrastructure terms of schools and housing and transport and so on? And in what way can we somehow balance the EU level quota proposals with some sort of EU level plan for addressing the infrastructural needs of all these newcomers? Ambroise.
I'm not going to go into the politics of your question. I'm going to stay on the technical points, which are extremely important as well. And there are many things that we can do to help deal with the point you've raised, which are extremely valid and recognized in European circles about the need to make sure that we have appropriate housing, education, etc. There are actually things we can do. There are three geographies, if I may say so. The geography of the countries that are actually the most affected in terms of the number of refugees, especially in comparison to their own population. I'm talking about Jordan and Lebanon, for example, where we do projects, where we can also develop projects there. There are, or Turkey as well, there are countries that are also closer to us where we can also help, especially the countries like Serbia and a few others in the Western Balkans. And there is what we can do in the European Union. And here we have already developed a number of projects, especially in the social housing. This is a sector that we know quite well, and we are developing this kind of projects in cooperation, of course, not only with the countries, because it depends whether there is demand or not for this, but also with other institutions that have a special knowledge on the issue of refugee. And in the case of EIB, we work closely with the Bank of the Council of Europe that has been created in 1956 to deal with the crisis created by the refugees from Hungary. So it's not going to be, it's a big question for Europeans, and it will need a reply that comes from various circles.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jan, any thoughts?
Maybe just one quick thought. I mean, Europe has two big economic challenges: short-term, a 250 billion aggregate demand gap; long-term, a terrible demography. Migration can solve both. While the people come in, they have huge needs for housing, for clothing, for food, for everything. They solve the demand issue, and long-term, they have a much healthier demographic than the resident population. The challenge is to bridge the short-term in terms of the financing, which comes back to some of the questions on what can you do about the public financing. Or maybe that's actually an opportunity for the EIB again. Is there actually innovative models to give those refugees access to microloans and the like to build their life?
Can I extend the question of Giles just on, I mentioned before, there is no fixed profitable, non-profitable, but there's also the timing. We all know as investors that education, for example, is a terrible investment over 5, 10, 15 years, is the best investment you can do over 25 years. But who are the investors investing over 25? Very few. So the question is the topic of education, and we all know that all the European universities on average in overall trend are going down in global, I mean, I'm not a basher, I think not everything is negative, but is education part of the plan? Could it be? Have you seen some interesting models, maybe Jan and Ambroise? Would you be looking at that area, which is definitely something where others are not going, or very few?
Yes, of course.
You are extending now the problem actually to how to run public finance. This has nothing to do, in particular, with the 350 billion of...
Nor is this session.
Yeah, sorry.
This session is about debating Europe's infrastructural challenges.
Yeah.
It is not about the Juncker Plan.
Aha. But then I would like to come back on the remarks of Philip Maystadt, who formulated 3 conditions for investments apart from the finance deficit. And then I would like to make a comparison. The first is that when I was a member of parliament in the Netherlands, we suggested that a part of the income from gas in Groningen was dedicated to innovation and incentives for productive investments in the future. The Minister of Finance refused because he said, I am the master of the game. What comes in comes with me, what goes out goes via me, and nothing separate. That is the traditional view of the Ministers of Finance, which are, as I said this afternoon, are masters of the game in Europe. Another approach is the sovereign wealth funds in Norway. They did it, and they invest their oil dollars, so to say, across the board, and they gain a lot of money with it. Yeah. Now, I would be in favor of such an approach, but there you come to the discussion on the, let's say, the premises of the European Economic Monetary Union, which are, as you know, built in granite. And when you talk now about the $315 billion, which are also in the program, how maybe you can use that channel to promote something of this thinking, and in particular where cross-border infrastructural programs are concerned, yeah, because they are rejected often by the capital cities because they say, okay, I have nothing to do with my neighbor, but it can be promoted via that line. And how do you see chances for that?
Excellent. We can come back to this. But I suspect Ambroise is going to tell you that the 315 billion euros in guarantees is not the same as a sovereign wealth fund. Let's go to Frank van den Broek, former. Yes, of course.
Thank you. Actually, I think your point about cross-border projects is a very good one. We need to develop these cross-border projects. They are, for reasons that you said, but also often for technical reasons, more difficult than others. But clearly, in implementing the European Fund for Strategic Investments, we will have a special look at how to develop these cross-border projects. And we hope that we'll be able to increase them, because I agree completely, this is exactly what we should aim at.
You have a list?
No.
Not yet.
Let's go to Frank van den Broek. I can just see you, Frank. Former Belgian Social Affairs Minister. What? Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There seems to be a bit of confusion and a blind spot in the... Never mind. I was actually trying to intervene when we had the discussion about the Chinese investment, but in the meantime, I'm very surprised to hear you pose the immigrant problem, the refugee problem that we have right now, as an infrastructural challenge. Because first of all, I think if you look at the amounts of people coming, I do not think that either in housing or in education, provided that we can spread them over Europe as we should, that it is such a big, huge investment problem in infrastructure. Second, it's not necessarily, as you pointed out, not necessarily commercially viable, profitable investment the way that we are looking at right now and that we need. But when the discussion about the Chinese investment made me think of a resume of all this discussion, which is that, A, from what I understand, we have plenty of billions of euros available to be invested in Europe, whether it is through the Juncker Plan or whether it is through private equity or pension funds or whatever. Money is waiting to be invested in Europe. Secondly, I don't think we are, even without the refugee problem, short of projects in Europe. We have challenges, infrastructural, which are on energy, which are on transportation, there are plenty of them, we can all name them, they are strategically important, they will cause growth for the future. The big problem, we just don't have the rules that allow the bulldozers to start running. We do not allow governments to invest. We do not allow governments to borrow. And I see, and that was one question I would particularly wanted to ask, I see a big problem when we talk about transnational infrastructure. Because the super grids, the energy grids that we need, the interconnection of energy grids that we need to get sustainable energy viable as a real alternative, they are cross-border investments. Very often with national governments involved, at least as participants in the investment. What's the risk? Myself being a Belgian politician and coming from a country living in a country that has more than 100% debt, what's the risk of getting into a situation where the German government has money available to invest, the Belgian government has money available to invest, but the Belgian government cannot do it because of the budgetary rules that the European Commission imposes and that do not allow for the future profitability of these do we simply have to change the rules to get the bulldozers going, to get the economy going, and to provide jobs for the children of those refugees, because that's the only thing that's going to solve the whole issue. Is this just a matter of European budgetary rules?
Yes.
I would say it's also a question of priorities, and you cannot have 1,000 priorities and say because it's important, let's do it, and we don't care about budgetary consequences.
Yes, fair enough, but we do have them. As far as energy goes, we have COP21 coming. We know that we can do something. We know that, for example, in photovoltaic, the cost has gone down spectacularly and is becoming competitive. All we need is the grids, and that's a government job. That's not a private sector job. There are 2 or 3 easy, transnational, European, obviously necessary and obviously growth-promoting sectors to do. And what is stopping us is a real commitment from the European Commission and the European Council of investing in those projects, and 2, a real commitment to change the accounting rules to make sure that we can do it. There's only 2 things that need to be done. That's a nice conclusion, I think.
Yeah. I want to bring in Frank van den Broek. I also want to perhaps very unfairly ask former Commissioner Almunia and former EIB President Maestad if they have any views on how we cut the Gordian knot that we've just heard being tied. But first of all, Frank. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you. In a sense, it follows up on the previous remarks. I'd like to insist that the question on education, which I think was voiced very well by André, gets an answer. We need to have an answer on that question. And the question is, can the education sector at large rely on spin-offs from the Juncker Plan or other European institutions to meet some of the urgent investment needs, both infrastructural and non-infrastructural, in the education sector? Or if that is not the case, if education is not really in the maps of the Juncker Investment Plan or other European institutions, then the question is, what can we do to get national public authorities going? Because if you look at education, there is a very, very striking similarity with what Jan told us about energy efficiency. It's a very striking similarity. The level of investment in human capital and the efficiency of investment in human capital is extremely disparate across Europe. It's extremely heterogeneous. If only the poor performers would catch up with the better performance, in terms of human capital, we would do better than the US. We would do better than the US. But it is this enormous heterogeneity across Europe, both in efficiency of investment in human capital and in the volume of investment. And so the question is, can there also be a kind of an education dimension or human capital dimension to the Juncker Plan, or is that not really a realistic idea? Can the EIB, this is a question for Philippe Maistat, can the EIB play a more aggressive role in this? I think there is a danger that we have a one-sided view on infrastructure and investment in a more traditional sense, that is, we need material infrastructure. We also have a real human capital challenge, I think.
Let me answer you from both, and I let Philippe add to that, EIB and the FC or Juncker Plan or whatever you call it, point of view. Education, human capital are eligible sectors to the Juncker Plan. Education investments in infrastructure that allows education is and has been for a long time a significant sector of investment for EIB. And that is the case in many countries. To take the example of the country I know best, I sign almost every month a loan with a department in France that allows the renovation of schools. It always includes something that is very high quality of environment or something like that, or low energy or whatever, or carbon low carbon element, so that we can show that basically we can improve the conditions under which the children can learn, and also have something that is benefiting in terms of climate impact. And I'm always impressed by the way the children who learn at school and who are present in these signatures, the parents that are there, the officials that are there, are extremely pleased to see that basically this is the way Europe can bring, because with EIB financing you bring low rates and you bring very long terms. This is the way you can prove that Europe is indeed bringing something positive for the benefit of the people concretely. And that's something that we're certainly going to develop and to continue. But we are in the hands of those countries that want this as a priority or not.
Jan, you want to build up on that?
So certainly education is as important, if not much more important, an investment than public infrastructure. Just bringing investment rates in education across Europe to similar levels is somewhere between 50 and 100 billion euros per year, additional investment needed. If I could choose on the rules, I would actually also activate educational investments and depreciate it over working life, and this way fix maybe some of those challenges. In the absence of that, actually there are all kinds of schemes that allow private investment and financing of school buildings, usually the hardware infrastructure part of it, usually at a higher cost than doing it via public finance. So we can discuss whether that's a sensible way, but at least there are solutions. I think there are fewer solutions for private investors actually financing the schooling. It's happening in the US, it's called student loans, but I don't think we want to go there.
Before we go,
Teachers' salaries.
you know that there was a very interesting idea floated recently that people should actually be paid to be trained during their work life. Because today we have this mentality, it costs something. But actually it's an investment into the future and a training. Joachim Bitterlich.
The Juncker Plan, marvelous idea, but the bird is not yet flying. And isn't there a problem because of the member states try, let's say, to control the projects, which would be maybe eligible, one side. And the other side, as far as I've understood, there is still an ongoing problem between the Commission, the EIB, and the European Parliament on, let's say, the body controlling the plan. Isn't there, let's say, wouldn't it be better to have less interference from the member states and to see much more direct, let's say, a much more direct relation between the EIB funds and those who propose projects?
Very quickly, but this is an important question. I would differentiate the investment plan for Europe, which is the bureaucratic name for the Juncker Plan, has triggered tremendous political interest, and this is very good. This is very good because it also shows the need to boost investments, to help basically cope with the problem of potential growth that we have in Europe. The question you ask about member states involved in the process actually is a complex one. We need to make sure that there are no interferences between the political level and the decision taken that has to be based on technical grounds, and this is why it's going to be decided by experts to give or not the guarantee. And I think that's going to be achieved. We need to make, at the same time, we need to make sure that the initiative is perceived politically as successful, because at the end of the day, the 16 billion euros of guarantees from the European budget, the 15 billion euros that have been given from the European Investment Bank, this is given from the European taxpayers. So we are also accountable to that, and that's why there are these reporting lines that are quite important to make sure that we achieve the political goals that have been set up by the European leaders. But I agree with you on a project-by-project issue. It has to remain based on technicalities if we want to select the best projects.
Mr. Almunia, you want to give a short response to Giles' request?
I don't know if I will give a good reply, but I want to say three things very quickly on this issue. First of all, the question of investment and the fiscal discipline and the Stability and Growth Pact. In my view, the investment clause, so the exemption of good investment expenditure, is the right way to find incentives for member states to use public resources to invest, unless the debt created by this investment effort in the public finances of these member states will create the wrong results, unintended consequences from the point of view of sustainability of debt. If the rules have to be changed, okay. Have to be changed some rules on the public accounting, because education is not an investment, according to the public account rules, and this is a big mistake. It's very difficult how to find the way to write down the new accounting rules, but it's obviously needed in Europe. We need to invest in human resources much more than other areas in the world. And third, the Juncker Plan expenditures are out of the GDP accounting, according to the Commission, if I am not wrong. Since January, in a communication, the Commission clarified this. The Juncker Plan public expenditure in the national budget is not accounted as a deficit from the GDP, from the SGP purpose. In my view, the programs to deal with the refugees crisis, not only within the member states, but also in the countries of origin, should be accepted also as exceptional circumstances that are explicitly mentioned in the Stability and Growth Pact regulations as an argument to exclude some expenditures, provided the exceptional circumstances, and these are, of course, exceptional circumstances.
Thank you very much, Joachim. In the interest of time, I think we need to close now. So before I get the final word to Giles, I have the hard task to try to summarize. I mean, let me give you my take on what I learned. First, it's probably this infrastructure plan. We focused a lot on Juncker Plan, obviously, is an opportunity to do things differently. That's what I understand. Probably from an accounting point of view, from a risk taking point of view, we understand that taking risk is better than doing nothing. From a methodological point of view, bottom up versus top down. The second word I heard is about channeling. I mean, there was this debate, is there enough or is there not enough money? Do we need the Chinese? Do we don't need the Chinese? I think that if these infrastructure initiatives that we are seeing allow us to channel better, to leverage better the money which already exists with a strategic view, I think that's probably, that would be very helpful. And then the last point is we extended the discussion. It's not just about, ports and fiber optic cables. It's about, infrastructure to kind of make out of a problem or an issue or a challenge like refugees an opportunity, the education issue. I think if we can extend and have a broad view of infrastructure, I think we kind of achieved our discussion. Giles.
Thank you very much, André. I just want to say I think this has been a fascinating discussion because I think we've gone well beyond infrastructure in the concrete sense, and we've been starting to talk about the sort of Europe people want to live in, the way people see Europe and the usefulness of Europe. And therefore, I think this conversation has established the limitations and the shortcomings of where we are at the moment. But I think it's also opened the way towards thinking very seriously about next steps, and next steps soon. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming here today.